This is your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 70. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Well, welcome back, CBT School community. I am so thrilled to have you with me again this beautiful day. We today are going to talk about letting go of the past. This was actually a topic that came up in the CBT School Campus, the online Facebook group called CBT School Campus. You feel free to join it if you are interested. It's free. It's a community of wonderful, courageous, strong human beings all in the fight to live a life where fear doesn't really take the lead. And one of the amazing members had posted their struggles with letting go of events that had happened in the past. And after seeing multiple comments and multiple people posting that they are struggling with it too and they don't have the solution, I figured it's as good a time as any to address it, because I really do think this is a topic that we all can struggle with, and when we address the past, events that we've done in the past, things that have happened to us, that can bring upon some pretty hefty emotions, right? It can be dreadful. Sometimes we have emotions that make us very happy and bring us much joy and help us in many ways, but we tend to give those negative experiences, those experiences that bring a lot of pain and judgment, we tend to put a lot of weight on them. We tend to give them a lot more of our time and wrestle with them more. So I wanted to address my piece, my experience, and my hopes for you in terms of creating a new way to deal with the past, right? So the question is, I'm just going to read you the comments. It says, one of my obsessive regulars is about the things from the past that my mind twisted and has blown way out of proportion. At least that's what my non-OCD support people tell me. Ha. But the memories cause me immense guilt and shame because I question my motives and I wish I hadn't done it. I do my exposures and I try to accept that I may have had the wrong motive and it may have been inappropriate, but it still bothers me, right? And their fear is that it will bother them forever. My struggle lies in the yuck, depressed guilt feeling. It all gives me as it looms and sucks the joy out of my life. That often leads to the worry of suicide if I can never get over it. I try to welcome the yuck moving and keep moving, but is there anything specific that has helped heal? All right, so this is a great question, right? So when I look at this, I see it as, okay, number one, we have a problem, right? And the problem is real, right? It's not, you haven't made the problem up. The problem is that you experience some strong discomfort when recalling on the past, right? And that's a very human thing. I don't think anybody is excluded from that. We all have things that we've done that I'm sure we wish that we hadn't. I know I have. But the problem then takes a new course when we deeply interpret that event and we use that event as a way to define who we are. The problem isn't the event, because we all do that. We have to first address that we all make mistakes. But the problem lies in how we create a story about this event. And we, again, as I said, we interpret it and then we let it define us, right? Now, another thing that we do is that we take in these events and we do a thing that I call gathering. It's not a clinical term, it's a Kimberly term, but I call it gathering. And when we gather, let's say we recall on a memory, and then we start to gather in all of this evidence to prove whether we are good and bad, and we gather things that aren't even related, and we pull that piece of information into the story, and then we gather other pieces of information to add to this story that we're horrible, terrible people, or that horrible, terrible things will happen, right? So I think what we do here is that not only do we let that event define us, but we gather. And then, and this is where it gets really sticky, we use that information that we've gathered to calculate our worth and our value as a human. And this is now where it's getting really scary and dangerous, right? Because now we've thickened the plot. And you can, even as I talk about this, I actually feel a sensation of tightness in my chest, because now once we start talking about what's my worth and what's my value and what kind of person I am, it feels really scary. It feels awful, actually, because now it feels like my whole existence is up for debate. And anytime we do that, we're going to create some pretty crappy feelings, right? And as you can imagine, and I'm sure you're probably nodding at this point, once we get involved with this calculation, or should I say miscalculation, we start to create a cycle, and it gets bigger and it gets more dangerous and more scary and more heavy and more problematic, right? And now we're stuck. So when we take a look at this automatic solution that we do when we're addressed with this problem, we tend to think that the automatic solution is to fight what happened, right? Fight the reality. And we do, we fight the reality, and then we add all this extra story to it, right? And not only do we fight the emotions, but we go into a pattern where we become highly judgmental. We start to classify that was good that I did, and that was bad that I did, and that was good, or that was terrible, and that one thing, that was the worst of the worst, right? And we're miscalculating, but we're being highly judgmental. And we know, you can go back to the episode about the skill of non-judgment, is rating things as good or bad is a way to show our brain it's a good thing. We can make sense of the world when we put things in good and bad buckets. So I'm not going to entirely diss that plan. But the problem with this high judgment is once you start to judge things as bad, you're going to memorize that as bad. And next time you recall that memory again, your brain's going to in a very fast way, say, well, last time you brought up, you told me that was bad. So if it's bad, I'm going to throw out a bunch of anxiety when we do this again. And now again, we're caught in a cycle, right? You have to remember, and I know I've talked about this in other podcasts, how we treat events in our mind, right? If we treat them with resistance and we push them away, our brain remembers that. Our brain takes note, right? So when we make it, just to go back, when we make these judgments, we are also then probably going to automatically relate it to our identity. If I did a bad thing, I must be a bad person. That's automatic. You didn't do that on purpose. Maybe you did, but most often we don't. It's just an automatic reaction that we interpret in effort, I think, to have things be clear. I think we sometimes miscalculate that if I did a bad thing, I am a bad person. Now again, automatically, now we're wrestling, really wrestling. And then we go into this thing where we don't want to feel the feelings that come up. And so we'll do whatever it takes. And usually whatever it takes to make it go away is a problematic compulsive behavior. It only makes it worse. It keeps us in the cycle, right? And the big hard piece here is, we talked about this actually in the last few podcasts when it came to self-compassion, is we still, it's so hard. We still believe that if we beat ourselves up for it, that it'll quote unquote teach us a lesson, right? No, this is such a mistake that we make. Nobody learns a lesson by being beaten up about it, right? It just doesn't work that way. And I'm actually going to do a full podcast on this very soon. I promise. But this is where we get stuck, right? This is our automatic solution. Okay, here it is. I'll push the emotions away. I'll heavily judge myself as good or bad. And that will somehow make me feel like if I tell myself that was bad, well, that still must mean I'm a good person because I am framing it as bad. So I'm still in the good team, right? So we fight our emotions. We do a whole bunch of judgment. We turn to the beat up in effort to protect us from the future bad things happening. And the last thing we do is we consult with other people about whether this event or this thing we did was good or bad. And here is where we get into big trouble, because then you're basing your experience now on the opinions of others. And this is where it's really, we can't predict it, because I might go to, let's say, my husband and say, do you think it's bad that I did that one thing? And he might say, no, that's totally fine. But let's say he's stressed out and he's in a hurry and he hasn't got a lot of time to deal with my anxiety. He might say, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. So his reaction is very much related to his emotions now too. And so now we've got this problem that is being weighed up by things that are completely out of our control, judgment that's not helpful, and opinions of other people that we can't really rely on, no matter how good and supportive they are. Okay? So the reason I go into this in such deep way is we really have to understand the mistakes we make and the reactions that we have in order to have awareness on how to fix it. And you may do some of these, you may not, right? You may do all of them, and that's okay. We're just no judgment here. But let's move now to we understand the problem, and we understand that we have an automatic solution that is actually not helpful. Now let's actually look at the result, right? The result is hopelessness, right? It's hopeless. That system is hopeless, right? That system creates us to feel trapped, like the person posted. I feel trapped. I feel stuck. This makes me feel like it's sucking the joy out, right? Because it's not working ultimately. And when things start to not work and we start to catch on to that, we do feel hopeless and we may get depressed. Sometimes we may actually have suicidal ideation. In this case, they said that they don't. They're just afraid they will at some point, which is very normal for fear to step in that way. So yeah, it definitely feels like a trap. And we feel like there is no escape, but there is. So let me share with you here my solution, or what I would do in this kind of case. Step number 1 is we have to stop calculating our worth based on things that we have done. And again, just to go back, the problem with this whole calculation is, how on earth could you gather, using that gathering term, enough evidence to really get a clear, case report? Think of it like a court case, right? So the court comes in and everyone is there, going over all of the statistics and the events, and, we have people come in and give a character report on them. How is that even possible? We cannot do a calculation on someone's worth. It's impossible. We would need to do, we'd basically have to comb through everything you've ever done, right? So we have to stop this calculation. Number 1, it's a waste of your time. It actually won't help you calculate worth, because worth is consistent. Did you hear me? I'll say it again. Your worth is consistent. It doesn't go up. It doesn't go down. Yours isn't lower than somebody else's. We're all equally worthy. Again, there's a podcast coming on this, I promise. But we have to understand that worth is not something that is calculatable. Calculatable? We can't calculate it. I don't know. We can't base it on money, because then we'd have to take into account how much is it worth, and how much is doing kind things worth, and how much is, donating money worth. Again, total waste of time. So number 1 is we have to accept that we can't calculate our worth. Number 2, and this is a big one, and I know you're going to fight me on this one, but we have to accept that we make mistakes. We do. Everybody does. We've all done it. Some have made really big mistakes. Some really have made 40 small mistakes. We're not going to get into the calculating which is worse. Please don't do that anymore. We have to just open up some space for the fact that I make mistakes. You make mistakes. Some days big ones, some days small ones. Some days you make a mistake and you didn't even realize it was until decades later. That's true. Right? I've had friends tell me, you remember that time when we were teenagers and you did that one thing that was really painful? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. So yeah, we have to accept that we do make mistakes. But then as a part of that step, that growth does really come from those mistakes, because now that I know that I made that mistake to that friend over decades ago, I now know, okay, I'm going to gently just curb that a little. I don't need to beat myself up. That's not going to help. I'm just going to make a slight correction. I'm not going to overcorrect. All right. That's a mistake that we make. I should have added that in the top piece. We're not overcorrecting. Some people overcorrect mistakes they've made by being nice to everyone and being a people pleaser, or being an overworker, or being an overachiever. Okay. So we don't want to overcorrect, right? You don't need to. And Sharon Selby, who is one of the interviewees on the podcast a little while ago, she talked about how making mistakes really just help us grow our brain, right? It helps our brain to understand things. She's an author of a children's book, and she talks about that in her book. Now, what we can do is, when it comes to accepting our common humanity, what I do encourage you to do is really stop and check in on maybe that you have some thought errors about that, right? Some people were raised to believe that you only are allowed to be good all the time, and I would actually correct that. Some people are raised, even more religious beliefs are that, if you do a bad thing, you go to hell. And I would actually consult with your religious leader on that too, because, that can keep us in this cycle of just believing that small things can have disastrous, catastrophic endings. So I would just check on any thought errors that you may have. And then we move on to step number 3, which is the most important, which is just honoring that emotion that showed up in the first place, right? There is an episode. It's called Do Nothing at All. I'll link it in the notes, I promise. But basically, there is an episode talking about that the simplest mindfulness skill is simply to do nothing at all, except just be with it. And I really, really push you to attempt this more, right? Is to honor the feelings that come up one at a time. So to answer the question is, here's that yuck feeling. Interesting. Okay, there's that yuck feeling. Where does yuck show up in my body? Often I'll ask my clients, they'll say, it's just a yuck feeling. And I'll say, okay, pretend I've never felt that yuck feeling. Tell me where you feel it. Where do you experience that yuck feeling? And they might say, well, it's in my throat, or it's in my chest, or it's in the back of my head, or it's all over. And then I'll say, okay, tell me more about it. Let's just explore it and make some space for it, shall we? And then we might move over to guilt. What does guilt feel like? Can we just allow that guilty feeling to be there without diving back into it and doing all that gathering and doing all that judgment and doing all of that calculating, right? Let's just leave guilt and allow it and be curious about it, right? Okay, where does guilt show up in my body? Now, one thing to notice here too about guilt, and I will mention, is guilt is something that we feel when we think we've done something wrong. Maybe society has deemed it wrong. Maybe your values have. Maybe the institution that you're in, whether it be a school or a workplace, they've got rules about what is right or wrong, right? I think that our job here is to be careful around when guilt shifts over to shame. Like I said before, so something you've done wrong doesn't mean you are wrong. We can't ride you off because you've physically done something wrong or you physically thought something that you deemed wrong, right? So again, we want to catch again with how guilt morphs into shame. And then our job is just to sit tight. Now, a big mistake people make is they think that by sitting tight, this feeling will go away, and it won't. You won't solve this problem, right? What I'm going to guess and what I've experienced myself is, saying sorry or asking for forgiveness, whether that be in a religious way or a spiritual way or from the person. It's not going to stop the feelings from arising, right? Our brains are going to recall on that event many times in our life. I've had people try to have hypnotism to get rid of the thought or, try to have neurolinguistic programming to get rid of the thought. And they've come up seeing that you can't get rid of these feelings. They just won't go away. But our job is to meet them each time, say hello to them, allow them. And then if you would like, if there is one thing you'd like to do, is just gently put your hand on your heart and remind yourself that I can handle this feeling. That's the only thing you've got to do, right? It's not trying to figure out how to make it go away or to figure it out. It's just to say, okay, I see you and I can handle you. I'm strong enough to ride this wave, right? That this emotion won't kill me. It won't make me combust. I won't go up in flames, right? And then if you feel like you're wanting to, you can have a gentle conversation with it, like we've just talked about, right? Hi, guilt. I see you there. It's okay for you to be there, but you don't get to drive. I'm driving, but you get to come along. So just take a back seat and we can go and do this together. Okay, we can go and get the groceries or, talk to my friend or even, go back into events where that memory maybe came up for you. So there we have it. I know that was drawn out and that I spent more time on the problem than the solution. I really believe in these situations that we have to know the breakdown of the problem so that we can do those same tools, those same mindfulness tools on each piece, right? So there we are. Just a quick recap. The problem is how we interpret it, right? That's where we get stuck, right? The next part of the problem is that we try to push it away cognitively, push it away behaviorally, push it away emotionally. And we know that doesn't work, right? Now, what we want to do is to recap is we want to stop calculating worth. We want to accept that we are humans and we all make mistakes. And even this mistake, I know what you just thought. You thought, yeah, but she doesn't know about how bad mine is. I know you guys. I know that's what you're thinking. Yeah, but you really don't know the depth of my terribleness, right? I know terribleness isn't a word, but hey, it's fun to say. Yeah, so that thought even more, the fact that you're doing a little giggle in your car or wherever you're listening to this, and I busted you on that thought that you had that your one event was more special and bad. I want you just to catch that, to recognize that we all have the yeah, but event, right? Number 3 is just to honor what shows up, right? Really just allow it. And then if you can, the last step, number 4, is to just have a conversation with it, but don't let it take the wheel. So I hope that's helpful. You're not alone. We all have a story that we're incredibly ashamed of, and that brings on a lot of embarrassment and shame and guilt and all those crummy emotions, right? But we can do hard things. And I want you guys to feel more empowered to catch where you're going wrong in your reaction to those emotions and experiences. So I hope that's helpful. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I will see you soon. Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.